while you guys are putting your information in the chat, we want to welcome you and thank you for your participation and interest in the Climate Reality Bay Area chapter. The Climate Reality Bay Area chapter advances the Climate Reality Project's mission since 2015. The Climate Reality Project is a 501c3, and it was founded by former United States Vice President Al Gore. There are over 100 chapters around the country, and there are 1,000 members who are catalyzing local solutions to the climate crisis in every corner of the Bay Area. My name is Taryn McGrew, and I am the recently elected chapter co-chair of the Climate Reality Bay Area, alongside Harriet Harvey Horn. Harriet, will you wave to everyone? Thank you. Harriet and I are pleased to have you engaged in tonight's Climate Reality Bay Area's first Black History Month celebration, a celebration of recognizing the achievements of African Americans and their central role in the U.S. history since 1976. Humbly, we would like to thank and acknowledge the Ohlone Indigenous peoples' land, of which we are all visitors on this land that we all reside on. Let us build our mindfulness around the land that surrounds us, as it is a part of who we are. It reflects our history. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that we all at some point in our lives, we've all been in a situation where we felt that we didn't belong. Have we all not? If you have, raise your hand, I'm sure. Well, we also know too that exclusion has been a defining characteristic of the United States.
The computer so I can play Minecraft.
We also know that this exclusion is based off of a history of stolen land, the institution of slavery, discriminatory practices that have built the injustice that we see every day. But guess what? We have the chance to turn it around. We have the chance to change the great inequalities and injustices by shifting our paradigm and how we look at climate change and climate justice, by incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice as fundamental principles. And guess who we have to assist us in learning how and why diversity, equity, inclusion is so important. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we have a conversation, a special evening of question and answers with UC Davis Vice Chancellor Renetta Garrison Tull. She tonight is with us to answer the questions that we have posed, and what you will also be able to, if you have questions, to please put them in the chat. I'd just like to briefly tell you a little bit about our special guest tonight. Before joining Davis in 2019, Vice Chancellor Renetta Tull was Associate Vice Provost for Strategic Initiatives at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a professor of the practice at the University of Baltimore County, College of Engineering and IT. She served as a part of the engagement team, was invited to the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organizations team for an engineering report to Meeting in Beijing, China, hosted by the Chinese Academy of Engineering. Vice Chancellor Renetta Tull has more than 50 publications, has given more than 20 presentations on various STEM topics. She is a passionate advocate, a global mentor, education policy strategist, and champion for equity in STEM. Vice Chancellor Tull, tonight we have before us answering our questions. I introduce to you UC Davis Vice Chancellor Renetta Garrison Tull from the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. Vice Chancellor Renetta Tull, I start with you tonight. The first question, so let's get started. And audience, please put your questions in the chat. Vice Chancellor Tull, would you kindly share your roles and challenges and issues with diversity, equity, and inclusion at the UC Davis campus?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here with you. And I don't know if I will ever in my lifetime be able to live up to that introduction. So I thank you very, very much. I do indeed feel like a superstar having had that kind of introduction. And so I do hope that I'll be able to answer all of your questions and give you a good time in terms of the time that you're putting forward to this. So to give you a little bit of an understanding of what we're dealing with at UC Davis and a little bit of the portfolio that I have, as Taryn mentioned, I got to UC Davis in July of 2019. And very, very new to California as a whole, having been sort of raised on the East Coast. And in fact, I'm on the East Coast right now due to a family emergency. So I had to fly back and just trying to keep things stable for a little while on this side. But interestingly, in California, what they did with this inaugural position is they took a legacy program that was the Office of Campus Community Relations, and they incorporated it into what is now the Vice Chancellor's Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So my office includes the Office of Campus Community Relations, or OCCR. It includes academic diversity, which basically has programs for faculty. It has our HSI initiative. I also have health, equity, diversity, and inclusion in my portfolio. And so that includes diversity issues at the medical school, at the College of Nursing, the School of Nursing, excuse me, as well as the health center. So anything that you can think of that relates to diversity, equity, inclusion for faculty, staff, and students at the campus in Davis, as well as in Sacramento, as well as our other campus locations. So we have research centers in Tahoe, we have a research center in Bodega Bay, we have other centers in other parts of California. So there is the San Ramon campus that has an office for our Graduate School of Management, for example. And so all of the different kinds of things that you can think of related to whether or not, for example, students are getting recruited from a variety of diverse groups, what's going on with retention for those students, and how about faculty? Are we recruiting faculty from diverse groups, and are we retaining them? Are they advancing through promotion and tenure from assistant professor to associate professor and full? And what about members of staff? Are we having diverse members of our staff at all levels, but particularly at leadership levels? Are they becoming directors and then deans, or associate and assistant vice provosts, associate assistant vice chancellors? Are they moving up through the ranks from a variety of diverse backgrounds. But then one of the key pieces is what's going on with our climate, and a little bit different than maybe the things that you particularly deal with. We're talking more along the lines of things that are happening in the in the professional environment. What is it like on campus? How are people experiencing life on campus in their particular positions? What's happening in the unit, in the department? Are people feeling like their identities are being valued, that they are being seen, that they are being recognized? Are there issues of discrimination? And we do have an office for that. Our office that deals with discrimination and other kinds of matters. And we do have a lot of reports that are going through. But interestingly, we're also dealing with free speech, issues of free speech. Last year in particular, in June of 2020, when we had the racial unrest due to the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, there were a number of things that came up because the emotions were so high and so heavy at that time. There were things that people had held in for way too long, and issues that needed to come to the forefront with respect to equity. Interestingly enough, people who had been in denial related to issues of race in particular, thinking, well, it's a post-racial society, we're suddenly faced with the fact that it was not a post-racial society, that we do have police brutality, that there are inequitable treatments. And so in the last year, with COVID-19 and making sure that there are equitable practices, that people have equal access to resources, with the wildfires and trying to make sure that we're taking care of our most vulnerable communities, with the racial unrest, and with these latest variants, and now looking at what's going on with not only COVID testing, but making sure that people are able to get the vaccines, and we're paying attention to tiers, but also making sure that different communities get the messaging that they are to be part of this vaccination process. These are all issues that my office deals with. On any given day, it could be any of these things related to a variety of groups, a variety of identities. We're also keenly aware of discrimination against Asian communities and xenophobia, and making sure that we are speaking out against those kinds of issues, that we are supporting our Asian and Pacific students. At the very end now of Black History Month, we're also making sure that people are very aware of different kinds of things that are affecting the Black community, but things that are being supported as well. Inclusive excellence is one of those things. And so I could go on, but I'll leave it there for now because I know that there are other questions. So I'll turn it back over to you, Tara.
Right, thank you. Vice Chancellor Tull, you spoke of climate. And we know that as climate activists, and in particular, the Climate Reality Project, it is comprised of a group, it's a predominantly white organization. We are working to bridge the gap between the environmental justice groups who are community and grassroots oriented, and environmentalist groups like ours. And my question is what advice do you have to environmental organizations like the Climate Reality Project to work on climate activism and action and advocacy when incorporating and while incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion at the same time?
Great question. Thank you very much. So I think that one of the key things is to, first of all, find out who the climate activists are in your community who are from diverse groups, and elevate those voices. Make sure that they are seen, make sure that they are heard, make sure that they are among those who are sharing the message, because people do pay attention to role models. They do pay attention to who is doing certain kinds of work and who is seen. So one of the key things that you all probably know about even more than I do, I think it was during the summer when Greta Thunberg, for example, and some other climate activists were being touted for the work that they were doing with some of the protests and the sit-ins that they were doing related to climate. And Vanessa Nagate, who was a Ugandan climate activist, was cut out of some of the pictures. And it was an interesting time because the Associated Press was trying to sort of make excuses during that time and saying that, well, the building behind her was distracting. And so it was just a composition decision. And there were other news organizations, Reuters and others, who were saying, well, actually they misidentified her. They identified her as someone else. And so I think that some of the work that this group can do is to, first of all, think about, research who are the activists, who are the environmentalists, who are people of color, who are from historically marginalized backgrounds, who can be among the spokespersons for the different kinds of initiatives that you have. You can recruit them, you can have them as speakers, you can have them as members or affiliate members if they're not from the San Francisco or the Bay Area, for example. If you have, I don't know if you have a newsletter or different kinds of things along that line, but again, showcasing faces, having videos, having discussions, those kinds of things are very important. And I'll give you an example. The College of Biological Sciences during the summer of 2020 really took this to heart. One of the things that they did was they looked to see who among their ranks were the scientists of color. And they tried to make sure, I think we have a little echo there, but they tried to make sure that they were showcasing their work, that they weren't just putting them, they weren't just putting their faces up there and just saying, okay, well, here's a Black scientist, for example. I said, here's a scientist, here's their work, this is what they're doing, here's their great contribution, here's what we're learning, and they took it from there. And so understanding who is in the field, and so even from our own College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences at UC Davis, as an example, Dr. Helene Dillard is the dean of that college. And there are other people who work with other areas of climate and so forth, who are looking at what's going on with air quality, as an example. And so finding out who people are and being able to amplify their voices, elevate their voices, those kinds of things are important. But also going into schools, of course, you have to raise up a whole new generation. So going into schools, doing some recruitment, doing some sort of showcasing of the different kinds of work that is there, and writing about it as well.
All right. Can I ask Vice Chancellor Tull, how can striving for diversity, equity, and inclusion enhance the African American community in all walks of their life, How can we're all striving for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in the African American community, there is resistance to wanting to integrate. There are times that we're met with that. But as we're moving forward in just transition, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a principle that some feel that they don't want to forge forward in a just transition in the position with diversity, equity, inclusion, in making in enhancing the African American community feel comfortable about the whole concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So I think if I am if I'm understanding the question, you're asking whether or not or how we can make sure that African Americans are embracing the concepts of DEI if they think that it doesn't apply to them anymore, or if they're not necessarily trusting of the system or the principles. I think that might be where you're going. If I'm not, you might have to correct me. But it's interesting. So I will use, I'll go back to the issue of a post-racial society, of which a lot of people think that we were part of, but are now recognizing that we are not. And what has happened in some areas of the Black community is that there are people who may have thought that because there are people in higher positions than they have seen in the past, that discrimination doesn't exist anymore, or that there aren't areas where the climate of an environment is an issue anymore. And unfortunately, one of the things that people have recognized is that, yes, there are issues or there are places where there has been an overcoming, but unfortunately in some other places that is not the case. And there's a saying that, you know, unless we all rise, then it really isn't helpful for just some people to rise to be at the top, where we still have other people who are still sort of left at the bottom. This actually goes to environmental issues as well. So it's important, for example, for people who may not have to deal with issues of clean water, or who may not have to necessarily deal with buildings that don't have the right structural integrity, or are in environments that are stabilized. We still have to care and make sure that we are putting funding in, being advocates for people who are suffering and who don't have the access to the different kinds of resources that we may have. So everyone has to really play a part. So it's not just the African Americans who are speaking up for African Americans alone. We're all speaking up to make sure that we are recognizing what some of the ills of society are, and saying that it's part of our responsibility to make sure that we're speaking up to change policy, that we are speaking up to make sure that when there are inequities, that we are making it known and that we're not sweeping issues under the rug.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to, this is our last question. I wanted to see if there are anyone out there in the audience have a question before Vice Chancellor Tull leaves us this evening. Is there anyone out there?
Taryn, as questions are coming in, can I address one other thing that I think is really important related to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So there has been a lot of discussion about what diversity is versus what equity is versus what inclusion is. And I have a really good definition that I would like to share. This actually came from AAAS, which is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. They have a sea change initiative where they're actually looking at those differences and looking at it related to how diversity, equity, and inclusion can be connected to legal types of definitions. And so I'm going to read a little bit of this because I did have some notes that I want to share. And it's important, I think, to understand the difference between them. So diversity, according to this definition, means the many interests, experiences, talents, perspectives, and identities, self and societally defined, that combine uniquely in each individual to enable a person to both contribute to and benefit from engaging in an institution. So with diversity, we're talking about sort of honoring all the differences and honoring the different identities. Equity is different. Equity means recognizing individuals of all races, ethnicities, genders, and other identities as individuals, not as representatives of a societally defined group, but enabling all individuals to start on equal footing to compete for benefits, resources, and opportunities. And this next part I think is really important. People of all races, ethnicities, and genders may face enormous challenges and work extraordinarily hard to realize their promise and aspirations. All of those who overcome challenges should be recognized for that accomplishment. However, due to longstanding and deeply embedded inequities in American society based on race, ethnicity, and gender, treating everyone equally or through color or gender blind eyes is actually inequitable. And that's because people of some identities must face the challenges of life, whatever they are, bearing the additional burden of racism, sexism, or both, while others do not. So equity is that aim that takes a level of remedial action to elevate truths and to understand inequities. And another piece to this is that when people think that there is a colorblind society, for example, they're actually not recognizing our unique differences, our unique identities, those attributes that make us who we are. And one of the things that many groups can do, I think this one included, you were asking what a group can do related to climate change and climate justice and making sure that we're bringing more people in, is to understand also that there are implicit biases and that everyone has a level of implicit bias regardless of our background. So the Harvard IET test allows people to go in and to examine their biases. But the interesting thing is we can't think that, well, we don't have biases, because when we do that, then there can be certain things or certain situations that will happen and we will miss the opportunity to mitigate any biases that we have. And so it's better to make sure that we are recognizing that we do indeed have implicit biases. So when certain situations come to the fore, then we can actively and internally make sure that we are acting in a way that is going to overcome that bias so that we can act effectively.
Thank you. Vice Chancellor, we do have 3 questions. Can you give us a minute? We have 1 minute left.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Bernard Ashcraft, would you kindly unmute yourself and ask Vice Chancellor Tull your question? Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me thank the Vice Chancellor for this presentation, and also my good friend, Deron McGrew, for this sponsorship. My concern is there seems to be a disconnect in the Black community from an educational standpoint on just what environmental indicators mean and how that relates to them personally and directly. And I have found most people having difficulty in understanding the environmental realities and how it impacts their life. As an example, healthcare. You know, I grew up across the tracks, like most Black folk from where I'm from. Didn't understand that the health disparities as a result of a train coming by every 2 or 3 hours. And I'm finding now that most people just are not receiving, and most organizations are not presenting the education that's needed to understand climate reality and how it impacts their life every day. And what's your response to that?
Excellent, excellent questions. The interesting thing is, I think this is the beauty of this particular group, because this particular group can bring those issues to policymakers, can bring those issues into communities, whether they are through schools, whether they are through churches, whether they are through other kinds of community groups. But there's advocacy that can happen at a variety of different levels. And so I would say that this particular group, among other groups, whether it's this chapter or a combination of chapters, or if you look at all of the chapters as a whole, if there is an initiative, let's say, to go into communities to make sure that they have knowledge about what is happening in their community so that they can be informed participants related to referenda that might come up in elections. If there are people and if your organization is organized to have folks who are connected to policy, so there might be a subcommittee related to policy where people go to talk to policymakers. Those kinds of things can be effective as well. And I'll give you an example. So I'm actually on the East Coast right now and had an opportunity to look at the local news. And there was on the news, my former pastor from my church, former church here in Baltimore, who was with a group of other faith-based leaders. And what they did was they set up an organization, and it's basically a compact with the city. They assigned faith-based leaders to counsel people, counsel men and women in different communities where their churches and their places of worship are. And they vowed to work with those leaders, those political leaders, on issues related to those individual areas. And so one of the things that can happen with a group like this, for example, since you have different regions already set, and I saw a lot of the regions being identified as people were coming in to say hello, I don't know if there are already if there's some political activism around bringing up what some of the issues related to climate justice and environmental justice are in those particular areas, and whether or not those policymakers are connected with knowledge, the knowledge that this group can bring to them, whether there are opportunities to bring the information to those communities, whether it's through centers in the communities or Zooms related to other kinds of community groups that you can partner with, and they can bring climate justice onto their agendas so that there can be some advocacy within the communities to make sure that there's attention to what's going on with air quality, with water quality, and those kinds of things. Those are some of the things that I can think of more immediately that could be helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice Chancellor, do we have enough time to take some more questions, or have we met our time?
I have to get ready to go, but I think I can take one more question.
All right, thank you very much. Christy, would you kindly unmute yourself and state your question to Vice Chancellor Tull? Thank you.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? I don't have my head.
Yes.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Hello, Vice Chancellor.
Hello.
You can't see me, but you can imagine that the group probably has graduated from college just more than a few years ago. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about some of the beliefs and worldviews of the current cohort of students with respect to equity, diversity, inclusion. What can we learn from them? And what are some of their approaches to support their peers or promote much needed change?
Yes. So as you might imagine, particularly if you're taking a look at Black Lives Matter and looking at many of the young people who are involved in protests, one of the things I think that we became very keenly aware of in the last summer is that despite COVID-19, for example, many of the young people felt that this was a fight for their lives, literally, and that they were willing to risk being out, you know, in the public, even trying to, it's sort of hard to do a protest with social distance, but they were willing to speak out. They wanted people to know what the issues were, that they wanted their leaders to actually lead, to not sit back, to not sort of rest on the laurels of different kinds of things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion successes that had happened in the past, but to pay attention to things that are happening now, to look at structural issues, that the issues now are not just to send a message of fix the student, but actually look at structural barriers, things that might be in place because of hundreds of years of barriers that were in place. So for example, universities were set up in, you know, the early century. So you can see historically things that were happening in the 1200s and the 1300s related to how universities were set up, how things were set up for all men to begin with. Women came much later, but in terms of people of color and African Americans, people of African descent, of course, they were not connected to any of those kinds of structures so many centuries ago. And so now young people are saying, we are here. We have intellectual prowess that we want to be able to use to contribute to the betterment of society, but the structure has to be willing to support us. It has to be willing to be good stewards of our talent, of our intellect, of the expertise and the ways of knowing that we're bringing to the table. And we expect those things to happen. We're not going to sit on the sidelines and be used, for example, just for numbers or just for pandering. So they don't want to be used to say, hey, you know, we're recruiting all of these diverse students, or we're recruiting these great students from diverse backgrounds. Let's put their pictures on the brochures and let's put them on the website. The students are saying it's not enough to just recruit us, to put us on the website, to show our faces. We need to have some committed, institutionalized structures that are going to be supportive of us as we try to move through the universities to reach our goals. We want to be able to have access to all of the same kinds of resources that everyone else has. We want to be able to be supported in our endeavors. We want to be able to contribute to the solutions of the world, et cetera. And they're not willing to be silent about it. They're going to organize, they're going to connect. Interestingly enough, they are learning from the protests of our parents. So I'll give you an example. My mom went to Howard University, so I am a second generation college student, but my parents met at Howard University, an historically Black college university in Washington, DC. And during June of 2020, there were all kinds of stories that she told about March on Washington and protests back then, which allowed my nieces and nephews to say, well, grandma did it, you know, back in the 60s. So we're not going to be afraid to get out there for Black Lives Matter now. So then wherever they were with their masks on, they were out with their signs as well. And not stopping there. They were started to run for different offices. They're starting to speak out with regard to campus safety. They want the campuses to be safe. And I think another interesting thing, Chrissy, is that they want to make sure that there is equity and that there are opportunities for more than just them. They're looking broadly. So for example, you'll have students who are part of Black Lives Matter who will also speak up for Asian Americans who are being discriminated against for xenophobia, and saying, that we're in this together. They will also say, okay, well, we have to make sure that our Indigenous brothers and sisters are getting their due as well. And they will say, well, was there a land acknowledgement for that particular program? Because we want to make sure that we're recognizing the land, the unceded land from Indigenous people. They are going to speak up for labor discrimination, making sure that people at all ranks have adequate pay, that there's minimum wage, and that those wages are living wages. So there are all of these different issues that are coming together. And I think different communities, we can see it even happening around the world, different communities are coming together, recognizing issues that are affecting people and saying, we are not going to be silent. We are going to move forward and fight for one another so that we can all move forward and excel together.
Thank you.
So much. That was so inspiring.
Well, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Vice Chancellor Renetta Garrison Hall has taken a little bit more time this evening, and we're really very grateful that amidst your circumstances with your family emergency, you joined us tonight. So we thank you for recognizing the importance of this event. And we're so thankful for the work that you're doing at the University of California, Davis. Thank you. And on behalf of the Climate Reality Bay Area chapter, we thank you, and we hope that this will not be your first and only time. We'd like to invite you back because we have so many more questions in the chat that we didn't get a chance to get to tonight, but I am sure that everyone will definitely love to see you again. So thank you, Vice Chancellor, for this honor, in not only honoring Black History Month, but we are honoring you for your great achievements this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for having me. And I would actually like to ask if maybe I can come back at another time to listen, to hear what you all are doing, because then one of the things that I can do in my position is I can amplify the message that's coming from your group. So when we talk about making sure that the message of climate change, the message of environmental justice, that gets out into the communities, I can be one of the voices that can help with that particular messaging. And I would be very happy and honored to do that. So thank you very much for inviting me and for having me as part of this community. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we wanted to take you into a breakout session, an intimate breakout session, just to go over some of her remarks. But in the interest of time, we would really like to open this time up for you to speak on what you saw interesting or was something that you'd like to speak on from Vice Chancellor Tull's remarks this evening. We did have Alma Soonbeck, who had a question in the chat, but Alma, would you like to begin with something that you saw tonight that you'd like to bring forth? You had something in the chat that you would like to speak. You had a question, but I'm sure you'd like to speak on. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Alma. She is our co-chair for our Climate Justice Committee for the Climate Reality Bay Area chapter. Alma, would you kindly unmute yourself?
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. My co-chair for Climate Justice is also here, Danielle Epifani. So my question for the Vice Chancellor was just, I was interested in her thoughts kind of from her perspective of where it is, like, is there any particular thing that stands out for kind of us thinking about bringing the issues of BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities into the center of our work as we continue to do that and figure out how to integrate climate justice in everything we do. But she did speak to that in her answer to some of the other questions. And some of the things that really stood out to me in her talk was, I wrote down a few things like elevate the voices of people in our current community from diverse communities. And I was hearing it like, we have a mailing list of 1,000 climate reality leaders, and we have a lot of diversity in our current membership, even where we are still maybe predominantly white, but we do have people from other groups, and what would it take to elevate those voices? So that kind of got me thinking, as well as just reminding us that like it does make a difference when we elevate voices of what traditionally marginalized communities, because people do look at people as role models, like when they can see people playing roles and being able to speak on certain issues. And so it was a nice, inspiring reminder. So those are my thoughts.
Awesome. We have Carmen. Carmen had a question. Are you still here, Carmen? Would you like to reflect on Vice Chancellor Tull's remarks in regards to your question, which was the best practices to integrate racial justice when discussing sustainability and environmental health issues, especially to raise awareness in our Black and Indigenous people of color communities? Carmen, would you like to unmute yourself and speak on that, or?
Am I on mute still?
No, you're on mute. I just wanted to make sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, there's a lot of background noise. I absolutely loved having the opportunity to hear from Vice Chancellor Tull. This is like my first meeting that I've attended for the Climate Reality Project, and so it's great to hear all her thoughts and so I just in my own work it's something that I feel should be integrated into all of our practices that we use in our climate justice work. It's just there's so much that I'm very thankful for her time and commitment to this. So
thank you. I did want to read something, and then we have a question from Michelle Rios. But before we get to you, I wanted to say something that was really so beautiful that Mayela came out and she said that in the chat, she said, may we continue to join our hearts, hands, and raise our voices as we lead on climate. That is so touching, and thank you so very much. Now, if Michelle Rios, if you would like to unmute yourself and speak on remarks, or if you just, are you here?
I don't see Michelle's name on our list anymore. Maybe she had to drop off.
Okay.
Actually.
But I have a comment if there's no one.
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wanted to, first of all, just in thinking about what the Vice Chancellor said that I wrote down, that she started by saying that in her university, they really make it a point to, with regard to the members of her community, whether they're students or they're teachers or leaders, they really need to do a better job recruiting people of color, and they need to do a better job retaining in the group, right? And they have to think about advancement through their organization. And I do think that's the same question for every organization, including our chapter. Are we doing enough recruiting? Are we doing enough retaining? And are we doing enough advancing through the ranks of volunteer roles and officers? And I think we can all be sure to do a better job, but I would just throw it out to this particular group of people who are very sensitive to this issue, that we all can build on this concept. What they're doing at Davis, we got the same work we got to do in our organization. We got to bring more diversity into it. And each of us has to, do a little bit, and then we can benefit from the bigger picture. And I would just thank Bernard Ashcraft for his comments a little bit earlier about how do we educate our communities about the injustices of the health impacts, and then piggyback on Carmen's comment about her first meeting today. And there's a lot of great information that Climate Reality has. And I would just remind everybody here that Climate Reality Project, we have a group of communicators, right? And we have Al Gore's deck to help communicate and educate. And we have free speakers to go out and reach any communities that you have. We've, as volunteers, to give talks and educate the communities, and also hopefully recruit more people into our organization. So I would make that an open invite to Bernard and Carmen to contact us, Tehran, and to let's take some next steps to help build better bridges into your communities to talk about health, climate, justice, and to strengthen us. We would appreciate your help. And others who didn't say anything, but just to, since Carmen and Bernard were brave and spoke up, I think they, I think that's relevant. Thank you for doing that. So back to you, Tehran.
Thank you. Thank you, Wei Tai. We do have Pam, who is our communication chair, which she has written in the chat tonight. Pam, are you still available and like to speak on what you wrote on about possible stories for our newsletters for those who are interested?
Sure. I'm going to keep my video on just to save you guys from seeing what I look like right now. Yeah, that's one of the goals. I just was trained in July, and I work for Cisco. Our mission this year is an inclusive future for all. And we just had a Cisco, I only say this because we had a Cisco check-in with all of our employees, and we do some in the morning, and this was one late in the day, so we get our APJC. But we have been so forward thinking on climate justice this year, and so being trained for the social justice and everything else, I feel like I've got a lot to bring to this group. And one of the things I want to do, besides right now we're focusing on getting our website and our newsletter up to speed, but we want to tell the stories and be helpful for the climate justice team and other groups, the business engagement groups, but tell the stories of those most affected so we can bring them in a little closer, right? So that does take reaching out. It might not make their names known right now. I do know a lot of the people affected. I know a woman I know who's Vietnamese, lives in an area that's affected by climate change, but is more timid, but she may share her story without her name. So I think we can begin to foster that through storytelling and hopefully encourage more people to step forward and get involved with the group.
Thank you, Pam. Well, are there any other remarks or questions, concerns that you guys like to just put out there? I want to say thank you so much for, coming forth and coming into the space tonight and feeling safe about your questions as it relates to climate change and environmental justice. We all know now that climate change is real. And we all know that it will take everyone's participation in this movement to stop the climate crisis. There's no doubt that there's not one on this call, not unless you have been traveling, who did not wake up to the dawn of the day at 9 in the morning when we thought it was 5 in the morning because of the smoke from the climatic fires in Northern California. We are the state of California, and we are leading in climate change legislation. The world is looking at us. So this is a very important time to shine our light as activists on this issue of climate change and climate justice and environmental justice. One of the great things about the Climate Reality Project that holds my attention is that we are a group of an organization that believes in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, especially with the tumultuous year of 2020. We came out and led in our efforts. But before that, former United States Vice President Al Gore and our CEO, Ken Berlin, has put to the task and definitely opened up space in bringing frontline communities to the forefront of the climate crisis and movement. So we all know that is our strength, and knowing that we are in this together. We have to unify. There's no time for the barriers. There's no time for allowing the inequalities of which we know are real to get in front of us for the work that we need to do in saving our planet. So I am just happy that you came out tonight to listen from a woman of color, talk within that space and from that lens of how we have to move forward in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what that means. And what that means is belonging and creating that space so that everyone feels that they belong. Because yes, we know Black, Indigenous people of color are impacted the most by climate change, but now we have a chance to move in a just transition and be in a space that we all unify and coming together to save our planet Earth. So I'm just thankful that we have this time tonight. Convening in honor of Black History Month, but most importantly, bringing and showcasing Vice Chancellor Renetta Garrison's Tull's accomplishments in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she has invited us to come back, and she'd like to know our insights. And we have great platforms within our organization to where we're able to show and complement the work that we're doing out in the community. Pam has just given you that, and Alma as well. I just want to say that we do have our training coming forward in starting on April 22nd, which is also Earth Day. It is a virtual platform, and for those of you who are already trained, we are encouraging to put in your application to be a mentor. So, is there anything else that anyone else would like to say? And thank you, Marilyn Stewart, for acknowledging that our Mother Earth needs our good work.
Thank you for the invite, Taryn.
You are so welcome. Thank you, Albertia. And lastly, but most importantly, my chapter co-chair, Harriet Harvey Horn, would you close us out, please? Thank you.
Oh, happy to do that. So thank you all for coming. It's a wonderful evening, just an amazing engagement, Black History Month, and DEI&J are so central to the Climate Reality Mission. It's always so important to engage on this topic. I really appreciated how Dr. Tull talked about how at Davis that what they do in her office branches out to all of the university and touches everything structurally there. And that's one thing this year we really want to make a special effort to do, is make sure that this is integral to everything that we undertake within our chapter to advocate for climate and climate justice. So it was just a wonderful theme, wonderful evening, wonderful questions, wonderful group here. Thank you so much for joining us. If this is your first time at a Climate Reality meeting, welcome, welcome. We're glad that you're here. Go to our website, climaterealitybayarea.org, check us out, and join us again.
Yes. This Saturday, we have a training, Being an Ally, Dismantling Privilege and Building an Authentic Unified Climate Movement. You guys have met